Producing travel and technology videos is the primary focus of this channel. Along the way, we've met other filmmakers who share in our passion, and we'd like to share a tool we've developed to support other aspiring producers. Since its introduction, Google Earth Studio has allowed filmmakers to provide 3D mapping and drone-like videos from places around the world. Over the last few months, the quality and stability of the software has improved, and new features have been added, which significantly enhances the capabilities of the service. Over the last few months, we've been developing a tool to import Google Earth Studio data into Blender and integrate 3D objects to augment the Earth Studio output. For those of you who are not part of the Google Earth Studio program and would like to see it in action, you can sign up to participate at earth.google.com/studio, link in the description below. In this video, we'll introduce you to the tool and the workflow from start to finish. Additional videos will showcase techniques to expand the capabilities of the 3D augmentation with Blender and After Effects. So let's get started. From the Google Earth Studio's homepage, we're going to click on Blank Project, give the project a name, and we'll set the dimensions to HD and our duration to 30 seconds. And we'll click Start. In the search bar in the top corner of the screen, we're going to type in Sydney, and we'll navigate to Sydney in Australia. For this animation, we're going to fly over the harbour and end up at the Sydney Harbour Bridge. In this introduction to 3D augmentation, we're going to add a few simple objects to our Earth Studio animation, starting at this park behind the state government building. We'll right mouse click in the middle of the park and add a camera target, and set our first keyframe. Then slide over to the left and rotate a little bit and set our second keyframe at about 10 seconds. Now jump to about 20 seconds and then slide over to the Sydney Opera House. We'll set a keyframe here and set a new camera target for the Opera House. We'll then adjust our altitude so we get the cityscape in the background. And we'll jump to the last frame. And we'll move on over to the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We'll set a keyframe here and a new camera target on top of the bridge. We can see as we transition between the Sydney Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge that the buildings get in the way. So we're just going to adjust our altitude with the graph editor. We'll add an ease in and extend the handle to adjust the influence of the altitude. Now that the animation looks good, we're going to make some adjustments to the keyframes. We'll take our last keyframe and move it in a few seconds. And we'll take our Opera House keyframes and we'll move that in a few seconds as well. So we can see that the camera target follows the ground from the park to the Opera House. We want it to jump a little bit quicker, so we'll make a slight adjustment to the camera target keyframes. And we can see that it jumps a little bit quicker to the Opera House there. And we'll add a keyframe to the end here so that our final position is set. A minimum of 1 track point is required to align the Earth Studio data in Blender. This will allow for easy object placement within Blender. We'll add a few in this example. We'll just right mouse click on the park and select Set to Track Point, and then give the track point a name. We'll then also add one to the Opera House. And we'll add a few at the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We'll just zoom in on the top of the bridge, add a track point to the top. We'll give the track point a name, and you can see that the altitude is 134 meters for the top. We'll add one to the deck level. And again, our altitude is now 61 meters. And now we'll add a track point to the water surface in the harbor. And we can see here that our altitude is at 1 meter. To add a little bit more realism to the scene, we're going to add the time of day function. And we'll set the time for a late morning. And we'll just scrub through the video and have a final look, and everything looks good there. Press Ctrl S on the keyboard and save this project. And now we're ready to render. So we'll click on the Render button, then on the Advanced tab. And we want to ensure that we're exporting the 3D tracking data as a JSON file. All those other settings look good. We're going to render in HD, and we'll select a location on our drive. And we'll click Start to Render. For the 3D augmentation, we're going to be using Blender. Blender can be downloaded for free at blender.org. There are plenty of resources available online to learn how to take advantage of the powerful tools in Blender. However, for this tutorial, we're going to go through some of the basic features of Blender, and in the coming months, we'll come out with tutorials showcasing the more advanced features. To construct our 3D environment with Google Earth Studio, we'll be using a free script we've developed to import the camera, tracking, and image data into Blender. We will be combining the 3D elements over top of the Earth Studio images to produce the final results. Switching over to Blender, we'll delete the default cube, then select the Scripting tab. Then click on the New button to create a new scripting document. The free script is available online at github.com. Using Chrome, we'll navigate to the code, link in the description below. We'll then click on gesimportscript.py to open up the code, and then click on the Raw button. Using Ctrl-A, we'll select all, and then Ctrl-C to copy. Jumping back into Blender, we'll press Ctrl-V to paste. There's only two simple changes you'll need to make to get it to work with your project. The correct path for the footage and the correct path for the JSON file. So you'll make adjustments according to where you've saved it on your system. Once you've made the appropriate changes, you're going to click on the Run Script button. It'll take a few seconds depending on the size of your project, but you'll see the Run Script command in the bottom left and the GES World object in the top right-hand corner. Switching over to the Layout tab, we're going to select the camera view. Primarily shown for reference, the camera view will display the rendered images from Earth Studio. You can move along the timeline to view the animation. The track points we added in Earth Studio are shown in Blender as planes for easy reference and manipulation. While it is possible to composite in Blender, we will be using After Effects to combine our 3D objects and the Earth Studio images. So let's add our first object. We're going to select Add, then Mesh, and UV Sphere. You'll place the UV sphere at our first track point, which is at 0, 0, 0. We can resize our sphere. We'll add the proper rendered shading. And then we'll want to position our sphere. So we're going to use the Snap tool. With volume selected, click on the Snap tool, and then adjust the height of our image, and it will snap to the plane. Jumping back into 3D view, you can zoom in and rotate around the object for fine-tuning. Back into camera view, we'll scrub along the timeline to find our next plane, which will be at the Opera House. And for this plane, we're going to add a custom object. To make the creation easier, we're going to select our 3D cursor and locate it in the center of the plane. And we're going to add a mesh and a cylinder to start off with. I'm going to resize the cylinder. We'll then adjust the y-axis of the object to 90 degrees. And switching to the rotation tool, manually adjusts the X rotation. I'll then press the decimal key on the number pad to zoom into the object, and tab to enter edit mode. Using the line selection tool, I'm going to select several lines on the side of the cylinder, and I'll be stretching these out to make a traditional place marker. Not perfect, but it'll do for our example. And we'll use the tab key again to switch back into object mode and into camera view. Now adjust the height and positioning of the place marker. And now we'll make it spin. We'll reset our rotation X position. Make sure we're in the proper position. And we'll just go to any frame in there where we can see the actual animation. Then mouse overing the rotation area and pressing I on the keyboard will set our first keyframe. We'll then advance the track head a few frames and change the Y or X rotation to 90 degrees, pressing I again, advance again, setting the X rotation to 180, press I, and then advance again, setting the rotation X to 270, pressing I again for another keyframe, and then the final keyframe for a full rotation, 360 degrees, pressing I. We'll then want this to cycle itself. So we do have the basic animation in there, one full rotation. So we'll then switch to the graph editor. We'll slide the panel up so we can see a little bit more of it, selecting A on the keyboard and then N to display the properties menu, then the modifiers tab and adding the modifier cycles. This will cycle the animation that we created before and after. We'll then switch back to the timeline and slide down the panel. So now that we created that object, let's add a little bit of color. We'll switch back over into render mode and then onto our material tab. We'll make this green in color using the principled BSDF. And we'll right mouse click and shade that smooth. Go back to our first object, the ball. We'll give that a color as well. We'll make that one blue and fairly shiny. Again, we'll shade this smooth as well. As with all shading, the light is critical to how it will look. So we're going to select our light, change it to a sun, and set the strength to 2. Using the original track point plane, we're going to size this up to see the shadow that is going to be cast on the field here. This is a simple way to create a shadow catcher for Eevee. We'll first find a good frame number where we can get a good background for the image to create our shadow catcher. And we're here at 68, so we'll create a new shader and then go to the shading tab. We'll just move these items over to the right, and I'm going to add a image of that particular frame that will be displayed on the plane itself. There are a few quicker ways to add an image, but given that we may want to make some adjustments in the future, I'm going to use the UV map and the mapping vector. And then we will add the image texture and connect our nodes. We'll load up the image, which will be in our footage folder, and we'll search for frame 68. So we'll double click on the 68 and it will load the image. We'll then jump over to the UV editor. With our camera view, we will project from view and it will automatically line up the image onto the plane to act as our shadow catcher. As you can see, because of the lighting conditions, the plane itself is slightly discolored compared to the background. So we're just going to set our world color system and then go back into the light and make adjustments so that the colors match. First thing we'll do is we'll put our light so it's in the 0,0,0 coordinate. That just gives us a little bit of an easier chance of aiming the light properly. We'll then use the rotation tool to make adjustments to the angle of the sunlight. And we want to match up the shadow from the trees there as well. When it looks like the angle of the shadows match, we'll adjust the strength of the sunlight so that we can get the shadow catcher matching the same shade as the actual background image. So we'll make sure our specular is turned all the way down and our roughness is all the way up. And we'll fine-tune the strength adjustments. And once we're satisfied with the light there for the shadow catcher, we'll jump over to our place mark and we'll change the normals to auto smooth just to give ourselves a bit of a crisper edge on those. And we'll head on over to the bridge now to add our final object. We'll begin by selecting the plane on top of the bridge. Set our 3D cursor to the center of the plane. And now we're going to add an image as a plane. So we're going to select an image we built, sort of a place card for the bridge, and it will create the object for us. It seems fairly invisible right now, mainly because the default is the alpha blend for that type of file format. Switch it over to alpha clip so we can see it. We'll then resize the object and rotate it so that it's parallel with the bridge itself. We'll then pull the object out away from the bridge, and we'll have this revealing itself coming from the ocean surface. So we'll bring it down below our ocean surface plane, select our ocean surface plane, and resize that. Now, it's okay that our plane is cutting into what seems to be the image from Google Earth Studio. We're going to be using the holdout shader on this, which basically makes it invisible and anything behind it invisible. We'll then use that shader to reveal the card coming from the ocean surface. So we're going to set a keyframe there. We'll slide it up and set a keyframe there, and also keyframe our rotation as well. Then advance a little bit further and change our rotation. That will be our Z rotation, so that it's facing the camera. And so that animation is complete. So we'll now just review the animation and prepare for the final render. We'll jump over the card. We'll switch that now back to the blend mode of alpha blend. We'll then select the objects that we do not want to appear in the final render. This is done by displaying the render toggle. We'll then toggle the items that we do want to hide in the final render. And the bridge deck, bridge top, we do want to hide. The bridge under is a holdout, and then the opera plane we want to hide, but the park plane we are using as a shadow catcher. So it looks like everything that we want to show is showing, and everything hidden is hidden. So we'll go over to the render tab. We'll turn on the ambient inclusion, the screen space reflections, and most importantly, we want to make sure that the film transparent option is selected. We will select a folder on our hard drive where we want to save the render, and I already have one set up here for a test I previously did. So we'll just overwrite everything there. We want to make sure that we're using a PNG file format with transparency. This will ensure that the objects are isolated. And we'll do a test render of just one frame. And you can see there we have the shadow catcher plane along with the ball and the screen space reflections there as well. You can see how the holdout appears. Again, that will be completely transparent when doing the final render. And so this is what it will look like with the rendered objects there. You can see there's a little bit of transparency there also in that card as well. So we'll select render and then render animation, and it will save the files to the folder. And now that that's finished rendering, we're going to open up Adobe After Effects to composite our images. Start by right mouse clicking in the project panel and selecting Import and then File. And then navigate to the rendered folder and select the first image. This will import the PNG sequence, then do the same, import file, and into our Google Earth Studio footage, select the first item. This will be a JPEG sequence, and we have our two image sequences. Drag down the objects first, and then the Google Earth Studio images underneath, and you can see that they line up perfectly. In After Effects, we could add additional color correction or effects. But for this tutorial, we'll just double check our animation and alignment, and then render out the final video. In upcoming videos, we'll show you how to add more advanced objects with motion, add 3D KML route paths, use masking and green screens to place objects behind Earth Studio buildings, create reflective water surfaces, and replace building facades. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a comment and like the video. And if you aren't already, subscribe to our channel. We've also set up a second channel with more in-depth tutorials and projects focused on technology. Be sure to check it out, link in the description below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.